So I know this video is really late and it took me a lot longer than it probably should have, but I wanted it to be worthy of the clickbaity title. Absolver is an open-world online fighting exploration game, or for short, I guess. At the start of the game, your character is chosen by Headmaster Gandalf as the next prospect to enter the Matrix. Once inside, it's up to you to battle your way from the ground up through 5 marked ones, 2 intense bosses, and lastly, this bitch whose name I've forgotten completely, to finally become an Absolver. Should finish it in about 6 to 8 hours. Oh shit, did I leave out any details in the story? Because so did the developers. You're sort of thrown into this game without really understanding your purpose, origin, motivation, or anything of the sort, which could be perceived as lazy writing, or perhaps there's a much deeper meaning meant to be extracted from within the cracks and crevices of the world, which again is pretty much like the Matrix. I thought about replaying through the story mode a second time to maybe get a clearer picture of what's happening, but I got about 30 minutes in before realizing that this game is once again very challenging in the beginning, so I pretty much hit fuck it. Suffice to say, the story isn't exactly big or good. In fact, if it wasn't for how addicting I found the fighting in this game, it would have the replayability of a Call of Duty campaign with the emotional depth of No Man's Sky, and while I guess the latter is actually true, No Man's Sky doesn't make you feel like an actual fucking ninja. There's something satisfying about throwing out combos that you designed while constantly dodging or blocking enemy attacks, and even the bots in the game are fun and sometimes challenging to fight. While I don't consider myself particularly good at video games in general, it's still surprising to me that after 20 hours of play I still find myself dying at the hands of Jin fucking Meska. More on that later. It's really satisfying to put together a masterful attack chain in the combat deck editor and then see it pay off in an actual fight, and I feel constantly compelled to rework my style and try new things, which in a lot of ways can end up screwing me when my opponent knows every attack in their chain like the back of their mask and I'm trying to figure out which combo has the coolest looking kicks. I could probably spend around 10 minutes trying to explain the combat and progression in this game alone, and I just might do that in the future if it's something people want to see, but I'm not going to talk about it too much here because I'm not even sure I fully understand it. I'm sure it goes without saying, but I don't play video games to win or be the best. I play because they're fun, which is why I'll put more hours into scripting this review than I will the actual game that I'm reviewing. It's not that I don't like playing the game, but more because I hate myself. Another thing that I like about this game, and yes, there are quite a lot of things that I like despite how much of an egocentric asshat I can be, is that player versus player combat can be 100% avoided if you so choose. By setting the game to offline mode or even just invite only, you can play alone or with a couple of friends without running into strangers that want nothing more than to test your skill in a battle of high punch, low kick, high punch, repeat. Don't get me wrong, I think the online experience is a much fuller game and should at least be given a good try, but it's handy to jump in offline when you can't connect to the internet or just want a more relaxing experience. Although it's hard to imagine a scenario where exploring winding environments with a decent soundtrack while also beating the shit out of randoms is anything but relaxing. Especially when fighting another player while exploring doesn't punish you in any way. In fact, it rewards you with experience if anything. First you bow, wouldn't want to upset the honor gods, then you fight to the death, and after someone loses, the winner can revive them, bow again if they're into that, and continue doing whatever it is they were doing. The game actually rewards players for sparring each other, and it encourages a more friendly dueling environment. Of course, there will be those dickheads who taunt you after winning and refuse to revive, but there is no benefit to behaving like this outside of being a schoolyard bully. I can already see the ganking montage videos all over YouTube because pissing off strangers just never gets old. Do I sound like I'm complaining? I'm not. I am that guy. You can also enter co-op with up to 2 strangers and work together to fight off NPCs and progress through the world. At any point you can cancel this co-op and go on your merry way, or even challenge your new friend to a duel. Or if you so much as breathe on them, the game might claim you're acting hostile and automatically start one anyway. And naturally, it's also possible to invite your friends to your lobby and even set the game to invite only so you aren't running into a bunch of players. Aside from simply running into people on the street, the game does have a dedicated game mode for 1v1s, and the developers have actually said they will add more game modes in future free content updates. It's a simple best of 3, but instead of every round resetting, the loser just respawns with full health and gets right back into wailing on their opponent. It actually makes the abilities more interesting because it's really handy to heal after winning a fight to keep your health closer to even with your opponent, but it's also nice to force push your enemy off a cliff. Instead of ranting about how this mechanic completely undermines the intelligent and fun to use fighting by turning some fights from an intense battle of wits and speed into who can Fusro Da the holy hell out of their opponent the fastest, I'm just going to accept that this is part of the game and move on. Hell, maybe I'll throw together a montage and call it content because as we learned from For Honor, that shit never gets old. Outside of this though, the PvP can actually be really intense and interesting, because instead of sitting around and waiting to counterattack, you might be better off throwing the first punch and trying to open your opponent up. Aside from how complicated the deck editor may seem, the combat is actually pretty simple in that you hold a button to block, use the right stick to use your ability, which can either be a dodge, parry, absorb, or much less effective dodge depending on your fighting style, and you time your attacks just right to increase the speed and effectiveness of your combos. A great many fights came down to who was the smartest with their attacks and the fastest in their defense, but a few others came down to sweet Christ, could you stop using that combo? I can't block anymore, god damn it, now my guard is broken, can I please dodge? Wow! So that's unfortunate. While there is something to be said about spamming attacks in this game, the better you get at reading them, the harder it is for your opponent to trap you in one repeating combo. Almost every time I lost a higher level fight, I felt that the other player was more experienced and familiar with their combat deck and how to throw me off with it. Only a few times did I feel the fight was genuinely unfair or that they were, and I'm quoting myself here, playing like a bitch. However, that doesn't mean that the game is perfect. I've already come across 2 or 3 moves that almost every high level player has in their deck, and I fully expect to see a meta emerge around the most effective combos and how to obtain them. Besides learning new moves and improving your deck, there's also a more traditional way of progressing through the game. I was impressed with myself for reaching max level in under a week, and I'm sure there are people out there who will reach top 100 players in the world in even less time. I'm looking at you, motherfucker. Leveling up in Absolver is pretty similar to the Souls games in that you have a number of different traits that you can improve which can increase your effectiveness in different styles of play. For example, I went with the Windfall fighting style, which is fast and mobile, so I mostly increased dexterity and endurance with small contributions to necessary attributes such as vitality and will. Will is essentially your proficiency in gaining shards that allow you to use abilities like the heal. Confused? Welcome to Absolver. It might seem like a lot from the outside unless you're that one guy in the comments section that knows everything, but trust me, it's really intuitive once you get the hang of it. Apart from your character level, you also have a combat trials level, which is exclusive to PvP. Leveling up enough will occasionally drop you some new gear, but more importantly, it lets you refight bosses and eventually start a school, which is probably the least understood mechanic in this entire fucking game. Once you reach a certain point in combat trials, you can start a school and teach other players your fighting style and moves, and naturally as a player you can join someone else's school to learn theirs. At what point, you ask? I don't know, it doesn't fucking say. Looks like around 40 though. The only NPC school in the game at launch is the Stagger Stance, and the way you level up in this school is to fight in PvP repeatedly. Leveling up gives you new abilities and other rewards that can be accessed across all of your characters, and that's pretty much it. In fact, I'm not even sure there's a correlation between leveling up and learning new moves. Seems like you learn new moves the same way you do outside of the school, which is by blocking or avoiding opponents' attacks enough times until you win the fight. Granted, the school gives you the whole moveset if you equip it, even if you don't have them all unlocked, but it can't be edited at all. The best way around this would be to have a friend to practice fighting until you both learn every move in the school, but unfortunately I don't have any friends that have the time or interest in playing this game half as much as I do, so I guess fuck me, right? My best alternative was to find and fight the only drunken stance NPC in the game by the name of Jin Meska. He spawns in the same 2 places repeatedly, so while he wasn't exactly difficult to find, he was a son of a bitch to fight. Out of what must have been 40 times fighting this same guy, I think I won about 30 of the fights, which doesn't sound too bad until you consider that 8 of these losses happened within the first 10 fights. Too many numbers? It was a pain in the dick is what I'm trying to say. At least I only had to run for like a minute in between each fight, and the game doesn't have any sort of fast travel feature, by the way. The world in Absolver is small, especially considering the game is open world, but being small isn't always bad. Everything is sort of connected through one central hub where Aragorn often hangs out, and you have 3 main paths to take as shown on the map. The map is useless and didn't help me in the beginning besides to point out, you are here, you need to be here, figure it out, bitch. There's no compass or anything to indicate direction, so it's pretty much just a guessing game of running from altar to altar trying to see how your position adjusted. Do I sound like I'm complaining again? Because I am. It's tedious and frustrating as all hell to run around the same area for an hour looking for the next marked one, only to find out the next day that there was a secret path under the stairs that you walked past a few hundred times. I finished the main story in about 8 hours, and 3 of those hours were spent looking for this last marked one, which is either a product of poor map design, excellent map design, or me being a fucking imbecile. Either way, it was goddamn frustrating. Although I have to admit that not having a minimap or some sort of guide to hold my hand increased my sense of wonder and adventure throughout my first playthrough. It felt good when I started to memorize where things were and the fastest ways to get around, and while I wouldn't mind a minimap being added, it might take away from that feeling. in spite of how frustrated I got on a few occasions when I was both lost and unskilled, resulting in running in the same direction and being killed by the same enemies over and over again until I finally throw my controller at the wall and open a much easier game like Dark Souls 3. In spite of that, I actually grew to really respect the map design in this game as well as the difficulty. The soundtrack to accompany you on your frustrating adventure is good. It's not great, it's not bad, it's just good. It matches the sort of laid-back vibe that I get from this game when I'm running from place to place and can sometimes go pretty well with fights. I don't remember having any problem with the soundtrack, but I do remember enjoying the tension of player versus player fights without loud music in my ears, or better yet, dozens of birds cawing loudly for literally no reason at all. The world in Absolver doesn't really feel alive, but maybe that's a good thing. After all, I'm pretty sure it's meant to be some sort of complex training simulator, and I'd be lying if I said it doesn't work. At the end of the day, I just want more from this game, and that isn't necessarily a bad thing. Think of Absolver like a house. It has a really solid foundation, great structure, but inside is just like a fucking couch. One couch. But the couch is amazing, it's one of the best you've ever rested your ass on. But that's it. Also, it costs $30 to sit on it. The content in Absolver is lacking, unless you sincerely enjoy the combat and mechanics enough to continuously grind PvP matches and the occasional boss fight. There won't be enough to keep you interested for more than 20 hours or whenever you hit max level. At launch, it's sort of a shell of what could be a terrific game, and as much as I enjoy what the game does have to offer, much more than any of my friends, I still find myself wanting more, and luckily the developers have said that more is coming. A 3v3 PvP game mode, competitive play, and more is currently in the works and is apparently going to be added to the game at no extra charge. The future of Absolver could be a bright one, but in its current state, the game is far from complete. After beating the main story, the game boils down to two things. Grind PvP, fight a boss. Grind PvP, fight a boss. Grind PvP, fight a boss. And for what? There's no real endgame here besides fighting other players, and you're not really working towards any specific reward or goal. But maybe the reward is the enjoyment you get from playing the game. Maybe instead of looking for some higher purpose, you're simply meant to experience the combat, constantly improving your moves and experimenting with your playstyle. Because having a finite end or goal might take away from the pure joy of fighting. You might end up with that feeling of, what do I do now, and move on. Because maybe we forgot the beauty and joy of what games are really about, which is purely to have fun. Or maybe the game is devoid of endgame content and they should really fucking update it so I don't feel so empty inside.